For those who have already joined us, thank you. I'm going to go ahead and get started with our introduction since we'll be trying to end around 12:45 today. But if you don't know, hi, my name is Shay Corey. I'm the programs manager here at DCPL, and I am joined today by Jim Shepard and Kelly Knox, and we're really excited to have you here for today's program. For those of you who may be new to DCPL, we are Washington, D.C.'s citywide nonprofit founded in 1971 that is dedicated to preserving, protecting, and enhancing the historic built environment of the nation's capital. I have just a few things to go over today before we get started, and I'd like to start by taking a moment to acknowledge some of DCPL's top sponsors whose annual financial support helps underwrite free programs like this one today. They're the DC Commission on Arts and Humanities, QTAC Rock, Douglas Development Corporation, Antunovich Associates, Atlantic Refinishing and Restoration, Buyer Blender Bell, Building Innovation Hub, EHT Traceries Inc., KCE Structural Engineers, and Quinn Evans. Thank you all for your dedication to historic preservation here in DC. Moving on, we have just a few notes on how the webinar will run today. If you have a question, please use the Q&A box that is located at the bottom of your screen to type in your questions, and we'll get to those towards the end of the program. The chat will not be available during the webinar, but towards the end, I will turn that on if you would like to leave a comment. And for those joining us on Facebook, you can leave a comment in the comments, and Kelly will send those our way here on Zoom. And now that we've covered that, I'm so pleased to introduce you all to our speaker today. James Shepard, who we refer to as Jim, has over 30 years of experience both in New York and Washington, D.C. He's directed historic preservation projects of national significance for clients that include the National Park Service, the Department of State, the Architect of the Capitol, and the Smithsonian Institution. As a historic preservation architect, he leads SmithGroup's historic preservation specialty across all 19 offices. Prior to joining SmithGroup, he served as the Director of Preservation and Facilities for Washington National Cathedral for 7 years. In this role, Jim oversaw repairs to the landmark facility following the 2011 5.8 magnitude East Coast earthquake, and he stewarded all historic buildings on the 57-acre cathedral campus. He was formerly on the board of the Association for Preservation Technology and co-chaired its 2021 DC conference. He is an active member of APT, and he is also an active member of the DC Preservation League. He's just joined our board, which we're very excited about. And Jim, I will now hand it over to you.
Great. Thank you, Shay. And I'm excited to share the Virginia Mae Center and its overall development. I will start to share my screen. Let's see. Okay. And I get into presentation mode. Okay, and let me back up a little. All right, so today I'm going to talk about the rehabilitation of formerly what was called the College of Preachers, and then called the Cathedral College, now called the Virginia Mae Center. So it is a beautiful historic 1929 structure just slightly down the hill from the cathedral on the cathedral campus. And I feel like you can't really talk about the Cathedral College unless you talk a little bit about the development of the cathedral, because in many ways the two were linked. So forgive me, but I'm going to give you a little history lesson on the cathedral because I think it is an integral part of the Cathedral College story as well. So the grand vision of the cathedral actually came about way back when in 1791 with the L'Enfant Plan of Washington, D.C. This should look familiar to a lot of you, but in this plan, in the notes to the side, there was a reference by L'Enfant for a non-denominational house of prayer for national purposes of celebration and mourning. And you can see the star that indicates where they had actually originally thought of housing that building, and that was actually around where the patent office building is now. It never came to fruition because of our forefathers' thoughts on separation of church and state. So that was sort of the 1791 inception of an idea. And then if you fast forward 100 years, this gentleman, Charles Glover, actually embraced that idea, and the timing was such that he was able to gather some important people. Charles Glover was the head of Riggs Bank, and he also was the head of a series of other organizations, including a Corcoran Gallery, which is no longer here in Washington, D.C. But he was a man of means. He gathered a group of wealthy Episcopalians at his home in Lafayette Square and discussed this idea of living into the mission of having a national house of prayer for national purposes, but under the umbrella of the Episcopal Church. And this was also in sync with the cathedral movement that was going on across the country, places like St. John the Divine that was built out in 1892. So there was a real interest for these larger cathedral buildings. And of course, the cathedral here in Washington, D.C. was in sync with that movement. Um, so he pushed forward to get a charter in place for a charitable organization that promoted religion, charity, and education, and that was called the Protestant Episcopal Cathedral Foundation. The charter was signed by Congress in 1893, and under the supervision of President Benjamin Harrison. So Briggs was able to get he was able to get the charter in place, and of course, then he needed to align himself with the bishop of the Episcopal Church in the Diocese of Washington. So, in 1896, Henry Yates Satterley became the first bishop of the Diocese of Washington, a newly created diocese, Episcopal diocese. So it was a great alignment of timing that someone of means and money was able to help align and partner with this new bishop. And the new bishop took the opportunity to basically seek out some real estate. So they found the real estate on the second highest spot in Washington, D.C., Mount St. Albans, and they staked out the property by putting in a peace cross in 1898 that was a commemoration of the Spanish and American War. And they had President McKinley come to deliver an address to dedicate that cross. Of course, that cross is still on the site at Mount St. Albans, just a few hundred yards away from where the cathedral stands now. But you can also see, by the way, in this image, the Washington Monument to the right of the Peace Cross and the old post office to the left of the Peace Cross, and further to the left, of course, is the U.S. Capitol. So they got a group of people with the money and the means. They were able to secure the land, and they had a bishop who was in support of this. The bishop then, of course, in Washington, you can't do anything without a committee. So he formulated an advisory committee, and a lot of these names should look familiar to you all. These are very well-known names of people in the DC community, several of which were part of the Macmillan Commission. And so you've got Daniel Burnham, Charles McKean of McKean and White. Bernard Green was the supervising engineer of the construction of the Washington Monument. Charles Moore was an author and a writer, and also the founder of what we call the CFA today, Commission of Fine Arts. And Caspar Charley, who was the director of the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City. So a group of 5 very accomplished and tied in people with interest in what this cathedral could become. And interestingly enough, there was a real dichotomy amongst these 5 about whether the cathedral should be Gothic or Neoclassic. So that was a real style debate amongst them. And interestingly enough, Ernest Flagg, who is also the architect of the Corcoran Gallery, was brought in to think about what the cathedral could be in a neoclassical form. So this was one of the earliest design ideas for what the cathedral could look like. Now, obviously, you know that did not end up looking like this. It turns out that Bishop Satterley was in favor of the Gothic, not the Neoclassic, and he thought that a cathedral should absolutely be in the Gothic style. So he sought out to find an architect. He went to England. He felt very strongly that the cathedral should be in the English Gothic tradition. So he was seeking out an architect that could help carry that forward. And he found George Frederick Bodley, who was a very accomplished and senior level architect who'd worked on Liverpool Cathedral, as well as some work at Oxford and Cambridge. And he actually thought it was important to partner Bodley with somebody who had some experience working in America, because this was going to be an American cathedral. So Henry Vaughan is actually English, but he was a student of Bodley and came over and worked in Boston for quite a stretch of time in the American Gothic style. So Satterley was very pleased to have this partnership to work through a design. They did create a cathedral that is in the typical cruciform layout. You can see this is the plan that they had proposed for the cathedral. And the front elevation and rendering of what the cathedral could look like. And I think for most of you who've seen the cathedral from a distance, the view on the upper right actually is pretty similar to what you see today. There are some design changes that were made as the cathedral moved into construction that changed it slightly, but for the most part, they set the tone for what this would look like. And they began construction in 1907. And this is the image of the foundation stone being laid in 1907 with President Theodore Roosevelt in the audience and leading the address for the setting of that foundation stone. Uh, Unfortunately, Bodley died before he ever saw anything go into construction, and Vaughan passed away just shortly after Bethlehem Chapel was finished in 1912. So neither of them, who were the sort of creators and visionaries of what this would look like, saw much of it completed. And that's where these three gentlemen come in. So at this point, we had a new bishop. Bishop Satterley also passed away. So the next bishop, Harding, who stepped in to be the new and second bishop of the Diocese of Washington, started to consult with Philip Hubert Frohman, a Boston architect, on some modifications to the overall design of the cathedral. And Frohman ended up partnering with some colleagues of his, Robb and Little, to create the firm Frohman, Robb and Little. And they would end up carrying forward the design of the cathedral and being very instrumental in and shaping and implementing Bodley and Vaughan's vision of what the cathedral would look like. And Frohman ended up spending most of his career overseeing the cathedral and design changes and implementation for the cathedral. About 53 years he spent working on that. And I mention Frohman because he, in turn, as you'll hear when I speak later, was also selected as the architect for the Cathedral College. So in the midst of all of this, there was a overall plan that was set forth for the cathedral campus, the cathedral close, as we call it, and that was Frederick Law Olmsted Jr. was asked to step forward to come up with an overall design plan for what the campus would look like. Currently the cathedral campus is 57 acres. At that time, it was more in the range of 30 acres, and Olmsted Jr. came up with a plan of mapping out the grounds, the paths, and a lot of that was implemented based on his plan. But you can see on the top part of the plan here, a bar building along Woodley Road that represented some housing for clergy and some other outbuildings that would support the institution of the cathedral. So there was already an idea of starting to think about some of these outbuildings and education buildings as the campus evolved. So that was 1924 was Olmsted's plan. 1924 is also the year that the cathedral stone for the Cathedral College, or the College of Preachers, was laid. So getting into this a little bit, you can see this is the 1927 aerial photograph of the cathedral, and by 1927 only the apse of the cathedral was built, and just in the shadows of that apse to the right, you'll see a wooded area which would become the site for the College of Preachers. And what made this possible was the partnership of these two men. So by this point, the third bishop of the Diocese of Washington, Bishop James Freeman, was in place, and he struck up a friendship with Alexander Smith Cochrane. So no relation to the Corcoran Gallery. This was the grandson of Alexander Smith, who founded the Alexander Smith Carpet Company. And he inherited at the time in 1907 the equivalent of, well, actually, it was at that time $40 million. So if you think in 1907 what $40 million was in today's dollars, he was an extremely wealthy bachelor and had a lot of money to put towards philanthropic uses. He was a great sportsman, and he also oversaw the running of the carpet business and struck up this great friendship with Bishop Freeman. And they had a plan for creating a place that was, in many ways, the seed of which was set by Bishop Satterley in thinking about a school of the prophets. So they struck up a conversation about a place where Episcopal preachers could go for continued education, for camaraderie, for collaboration, and to really hone their skills as preachers. And thus the kernel of the idea of the cathedral, the College of Preachers. And um, Alexander Cochrane gave at the time $1.4 million to both design and endow the building. So Freeman reached out to Philip Hubert Frohman, as I mentioned earlier, to be the architect of this project, and the firm Frohman Robin Little were the designers of this, and also the visionaries who provided the renderings for this design. And what I think is really interesting about this, you can see the building in black, which will translate to some slides I show later, that honestly was built pretty much in this similar format. But what I find interesting is that to the upper left of this, you'll see there's a library labeled. The idea was that this building would be connected to a library that would support books and research related to the cathedral. And then also on the top of the page, you see it says Labor Chapter House. So the idea was this building would be one of several that would be built in the shadows of the cathedral that would support the cathedral and its mission. The chapter house being the building that would support the leadership or board of the cathedral, which is called the chapter. So this was all envisioned as a way to support the cathedral. And you also see on the far right is the administration building. And then this is the upper floor plan, again, showing that connection of this building to these several other buildings. And today the College of Preachers was built. Obviously, that's the building that we were working on as renovation. There is a library built, not of the size and scale of what's represented in this drawing, and there is an administration building built, again, not in the orientation or configuration of this. And the chapter house was actually never implemented. But this gives you an idea, the rendering of what they envision this building to look like. With the, you got to imagine this is showing the cathedral rendered as complete in this rendering, which of course in 1929 only the apse of the cathedral was built. You see the Cathedral College in the foreground with the cathedral library envisioned on the left, and then in the distance over on the right are the sort of eaves of what would be the envisioned administrative building. So this is just an image here of a painting of Alexander Cochrane that actually is in the building now. So this is something that was given to the building when the building was dedicated, and continues on to be a representation of Alexander Cochrane. And then on the left, Bishop Freeman is buried in the cathedral. And what I like to point out is this is actually a three-dimensional scan that was done at some point of several pieces of architecture within the cathedral, this being his tomb. And you can see at his foot is a book with open pages, and on the left is the north transept, which he oversaw the completion of when he was the bishop, and on the right is the tower of the Cathedral College. So he was very proud of his involvement in those components of the construction of buildings on the Cathedral Close, and as it is represented in his tomb. So actually the dedication day was 1924. I have the date wrong in there, but you can see the image here with the houses of Cleveland Park off in the distance, and people here celebrating the setting the foundation stone. And we have great photographs from the cathedral archives of the construction of the cathedral. You can see, interestingly enough, there's a lot of stone laid here, a combination of limestone and granite, and integrated into this was a concrete structure. So it is a stone building with a concrete infrastructure that will come up later as we talk about how we manage the restoration of the building. And here you can see 1929 as the building is coming to completion of construction. But what I always like to point out too is you can see the construction of the cathedral in the background. So the Cathedral College was going up. And I should just mention, sort of philosophically, the Cathedral College, or at the time, the College of Preachers, when it was founded, was really set up to be a standalone institution. So it was to be operated separate from the cathedral and separate from the schools on the campus, and to be run on its own as its own entity. The design of the building included a series of 20 some guest rooms. It had a dining hall, a chapel, meeting rooms and classrooms, a cloister, a library for people to convene. So it was a real sort of independent college. And what you can see from this image, which I'll bring up later as we talk about the challenges of the renovation, is it was built into the hill of the cathedral. And you can see as the site slopes up, and then I'll show you some photos later, it's really embedded in the hill that serves as the foundation for the cathedral, which added a lot of challenges as to how we rethought the site and the building for accommodating new users and becoming more universally accessible. So here it is at its completion. So very similar to the renderings that you saw earlier as to how it was implemented, with this beautiful central tower, and then a wing to the right, which was mostly dormitory rooms, and the wing to the left that had the refectory and dining hall, and the smaller building off to the far left, which was to be a superintendent's apartment for oversight of the building and grounds. And this just gives you a glimpse of what it looked like shortly after completion. You can see the portrait actually of Bishop Freeman over the fireplace as the person responsible for really pushing this forward, and the image of one of the seating areas within the library. And then a typical guest room. There were some suites that were available with fireplaces, but most of the accommodations were pretty monastic. It was pretty simple setup, and at the time, the design of the building had shared bathrooms on the hallways, so guest rooms did not have individual bathrooms, and that also brought its own challenges as we came into 2021 and rethought how to redesign this. As I mentioned, there was a chapel, and the chapel was a great place, obviously, for preachers to hone their skills, and the wonderful library with a series of resources where they could convene, collaborate, and discuss various experiences and really expand their education. And I just like to show, this is where we were with the cathedral in 1929 when the Cathedral College was finished. So as I mentioned earlier, that there is a direct connection both by the architect and also by the vision of what the Cathedral College was meant to be, and where the cathedral was in construction in the overall spectrum of the development of the cathedral campus. And speaking of which, the Cathedral campus is its own historic district. It's the Washington National Cathedral Enclosed Historic District. So the Cathedral College, you can see, is this building on the top middle, just to the north of the cathedral. It is a contributing feature to the Washington National Cathedral Historic District. It is not individually listed, but listed as a contributing feature to the historic district. And the cathedral itself was listed on the National Register of Historic Places in 1974, and the Cathedral College is mentioned in that National Register nomination. So 1929, it was finished, and unfortunately, you'll notice a pattern here. That was also the year that Alexander Cochrane died. So it seems like a lot of these visionaries who contributed to these buildings on the cathedral campus, they either did not live to see their visions complete, or they passed away just shortly thereafter. But the building went on to serve preachers for many years. Whoops, see, I got ahead of myself. And served a whole series of functions. At some point, the College of Preachers, which was at the time mostly men, and ended up opening up the education facility to women as the Episcopal Church embraced women into the priesthood. And then beyond that, it ended up becoming more of a place open to other preachers and other denominations as well. In 2008, they just couldn't financially make it work any longer, and they ended up having to close their doors. So when they closed their doors, they ended up transferring the stewardship of the Cathedral College to the cathedral. And actually, in 2004, it changed its name from the College of Preachers to the Cathedral College. In 2008, it couldn't make financial ends meet, and they ended up transferring it to the cathedral. But as you all know, in 2008, we had the Great Recession. So while it was wonderful that the cathedral received this wonderful building and its resources, the cathedral at the time didn't have the resources to do much with it. So it was really mothballed. You can see images of it becoming really a storing ground for a lot of the cathedral's various resources from other facilities. And it really went out of use in 2008. And a lot of things were stored here, and a lot of the things that were accumulated over time were just parked here, basically. And then, as I mentioned, 2010, it was transferred to the cathedral. So I came on board in 2013 at the cathedral as a director of preservation of facilities. And one of the first things that the leadership at the time wanted to do, as we were sort of 5 years out of the Great Recession, was think about what this could become and how to fundraise to land the resources that we could plan to rethink about how it would be used moving forward. And we started launching into thinking about the design, and this was partly because there was some signature gifts that came forward that were able to support financially us thinking about the renovation of this building. So the building that we now call the Virginia Mae Center, the moving it from just an idea into full-blown design was thanks very much to Virginia Mars. So Virginia Cortella May Mars was the single major donor who was able to really move this project forward, and thus it was named after her. But in 2018, that signature gift was received, and we were able to really start to think about what the site could be and moving it forward into a complete rehabilitation. So this site plan highlights a couple of things. One is that you'll see the building is very much the shape that Frohman had outlined on his original design, but what you don't see are the connectors sort of on the right-hand side to a library, on the left-hand side to administrative building. They did end up building the administrative building, but not the way Frohman envisioned it. So it does not have direct connection to the library or the administrative building anymore. And if you look more closely at the building, and I'll highlight it in some of the photos, the ends of the Cathedral College, the east and west ends, actually are stucco, not masonry, because they left them raw, thinking that eventually those other buildings would be built. Of course, they never were. So this is a good image of just showing how the building is situated. Woodley Road to the north, the Cathedral Campus South Road to the right, and North Road to the left. As I mentioned earlier, this is really nestled into the hill. So the front-facing Woodley Road elevation and the sort of north entrance is hold on. Is a level and a half lower than the back part of the building. And wait a minute. Can Shay, if I just cancel this, am I gonna? Oh.
Cancel what?
Oh, sorry. Oh.
Looks good from our end.
Can you still hear? You can still hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay, sorry. There's something that just popped up on my screen. That's why it says leave webinar. I'll just cancel that. Okay, there we go. All right, so let me go back. Sorry, I got a little distracted. Oh. Okay, here we go. I was talking about the site. So the north entrance is actually about a level and a half lower than the south entrance because it was built into the hill. So honestly, in our redesign, the intent was to have this be a facility that supported the cathedral programming and was an extension of the cathedral programming. The purpose for the building is not that different from what the building was designed to do. There are some signature historic spaces such as number 7, the refectory, and number 4, the chapel, that were going to continue to remain being gathering spaces and education spaces. The cathedral envisioned this to be a education and conference center that is an extension of the cathedral programming. So while it's no longer sort of a standalone educational facility and it no longer is specifically focused on the continuing education of preachers, it is envisioned to be a conference center and continuing extension of the cathedral programming and education purposes. And more importantly, it was set up to be able to embrace distance learning as well. So wired for all kinds of virtual experiences as well as in-person experiences. You can kind of get a closer understanding of the building here. You've got the sort of long bar at the top, and then you've got a cloister that surrounds a courtyard or garth, and then the library, which really serves as the heart of the facility. And I just highlighted on these plans in sort of beige the circulation. The building, because it's built into the hill and it has so many different functions, had 15 different levels internally inside the building. So you can imagine trying to make all of this university accessible is a real challenge. And that's something we really had to focus on. And I'll just call this out on the plan here. Number 9 are the elevators. So we did introduce 2 new elevators. One elevator sort of discreetly tucked between the refectory and the entrance lobby mitigates the fact that when you come in that north entrance, you can take this elevator and enter the refectory or get up to the library level, which were actually at 2 different levels from the entrance lobby. So while it was a wonderful creative design at the time in 1929, having 15 different levels in the building in today's world and being able to open that up to all kinds of people for different education experiences is a real challenge. So that elevator served as sort of the mitigator between the lobby and those other spaces on the sort of east end of the building. And then on the west end of the building, another elevator was introduced that was able to connect upper guest room floors to the meeting room floors and to the chapel. So this actually opens out onto the chapel level as well. Then another challenge we had in the building was trying to mitigate egress and make the egress code compliant. You can see number 2, we actually, within the envelope of the existing building, introduced a new egress stair that was fully code compliant. So it meant sacrificing some smaller rooms in the building, but it also meant we didn't have to extend beyond the footprint of the existing historic building to put that egress stair in. So it was a real design effort to make sure that we could meet all the code requirements and get that stair in. And then this just shows you the floor level that is coincident with the south elevation of the building. So we did introduce this accessible pathway that comes to the south side of the building that allows you to get in a fully accessible entrance on the south side of the building. And again, just showing you the circulation within the building. By the time you're at this level in the building, most of the guest rooms are showing up here, and we did have a long-term suite for accessibility at this level in close proximity to the accessible entrance. The interesting thing here is you can see the rooms numbered 13. Part of the wing that had the dormitory rooms in it had a half floor in the attic, and we really didn't want to waste that square footage. So we came up with a creative idea of having these rooms be loft rooms. And you'll see in the building section that they have the four loft rooms that have integral spiral stairs that get you up to sort of a sleeping loft within those rooms. And then the central tower, which you saw in those historic photographs, became 2 sort of generous suites, one of them a longer term suite for visiting lecturers at the cathedral. So you can see here, this is a section cut through the site that very clearly shows that elevation change from front to back of the building. So the north entrance being almost a complete level and a half lower than the south entrance. And this shows a good section of how the library is such a central component to the building. And you can see how the tower room has a series of stacked rooms where we had to introduce a new stair. The section also highlights, I think, this in the north entrance where we tucked that new elevator in the lobby that mitigates the level of the library and the little level of the refectory. It's really hard when I describe it in plan, but when you see it in the section, you realize how many different levels and how complex this building is. Okie doke, let's see. And there we go. Um, this is a longitudinal section just showing the relationship of that central tower and the entrance lobby to the refectory. So again, several steps up to get into the refectory. Number 9, you can see that elevator sort of tucked into that core, where we were really able to, in most cases, make it disappear. And you see over on the right the beginnings of the loft rooms. So the spiral staircase taking you up to the eaves, and that actually shows up better here in this section to the right. This is taking sort of a section through where the stair is coming up and giving access to that sleeping loft that also incorporates some of the dormers in the roof line of the building. So this shows the sort of the bottom level here are meeting rooms, the level 2 and 3 are the guest rooms, and then on the top is that loft room. And that section on the left, you'll see the library and how that becomes such a central location. The library does have visual connection to what we call the garth or courtyard, but even the courtyard is 2 steps up from the library. So when I mentioned 15 levels, it really was a complicated internal layout and a real challenge to try and figure out how to provide access to all of those. So now we moved into construction in 2021, and this starts to show the complexities of the inside of the building. You'll see here, you're looking at actually where we put the elevator for the guest room wing. So we had to remove a lot of existing circulation to be able to get that elevator in and have that elevator connect the many levels. And the doors to your left here open into the area where we ended up putting that new egress stair I referenced. So that new egress stair was able to mitigate the 3.5 levels and provide a code compliant egress to the outside of the building. This is a view of the chapel before the renovation was complete. This is just a view of the complete renovated building on the outside. And we were not able to accommodate accessibility at the north entrance. So this is the north entrance, as I mentioned, and the lower level of the building. Again, that north entrance, all of the sort of entrance paths, landscape is new. We did get LEED certification for the building, and as part of that, we had to accommodate a lot of stormwater management. You can see the landscaping that actually disguises a whole stormwater management catch basin right in the front of the building. Here is the south entrance. So this is the accessible entrance where we were able to integrate that path and provide a fully accessible entrance on the south side of the building, and they can then get you in at 1.5 levels up from that north entrance. This shows a before and after of the entrance lobby. So on the upper left is the entrance lobby, just as we were beginning construction, and on the right is the finished lobby. You can see that elevator that's tucked in on the right that mitigates the lobby, the refectory, and the library. There was all new lighting installed to highlight the wonderful decorative painted ceiling. We did restore that ceiling as part of the process of the restoration. And then on the upper left is the refectory before restoration, and on the right is the fully restored refectory. But one of the things that we did have to do, obviously, in addition to accommodating accessibility and all new building systems, we did have to put in new fire protection. So one of the challenges was obviously nestling and fire protection in these wonderful spaces with the hewn beam ceilings. And if you look closely, you can see them, but that was the intent. We didn't want to have them jump out. It is all there. The building is now fully protected to be co-compliant with the fire and life safety requirements. We did restore a lot of the historic fixtures that were original to the building, these iron fixtures, but we also tried to introduce subtly new lighting that highlighted the architecture within the space. And in this space, you can see, by the way, on the wall below the stained glass window is the portrait of Cochrane, who gave the money for the original construction of the building. I should mention here, I didn't earlier, but all of the windows were restored. These are original steel casement windows. So the windows, most of them, the casements were removed and restored off-site, and the frames and all the other components were restored on-site. So here's the chapel. Upper left is before, and the after photo. You'll see here there is a new egress stair that's put in the chapel. Previously, there was not a direct means by which to get out of the building on this end of the building, so we introduced this new stair that has a direct means of egress out to the outside that was designed to be within keeping of the original finishes and character of the building. Again, another space that has the hewn beams and trusses in the ceiling that we had to integrate new fire protection in. And we did take some level of effort to make sure that things that weren't repurposed in the renovation, we were able to creatively integrate in some ways. So this are one of the original beautiful old oak doors of the original College of Preachers design. We were able to sort of restore and put on the wall as sort of an art installation along with its beautiful iron hinges. So it was a great accent to that. And this stair, by the way, to my left is a new stair that directly connects the main level to the library. So there was a lot of stitching together of new stairs and elevators that not only provided accessibility, but also more direct circulation and a more clear means of egress in and out of the building. Here's a photograph of one of those loft rooms that I was talking about. So on the bottom right, you can see the sort of very tight quarters of the lower level that gives access to sort of a sitting area and a bathroom, and then a spiral staircase that gives you access to upper sleeping loft. So really interesting creative space for guests to experience. As I mentioned, we provided a series of meeting rooms and education spaces. So that this is one of those spaces, and the ceiling here is actually all new. So we were very conscious of what we introduced into all these spaces to try and both highlight the existing windows. You can see the limestone details on the windows with the steel casement windows, but we really wanted those to be highlighted, but also to add some features that were very characteristic of the old Cathedral College, even down to the furniture. You can see the Gothic detail on the chairs. So really trying to keep that character of the historic building while providing all new amenities. You can see in these meeting rooms that they're fully equipped with the technology to be able to do virtual learning within the classrooms. And then this is one of the typical guest rooms. You can see we had to be creative about integrating bathrooms into these guest rooms. As I mentioned earlier, all the guest rooms historically had to share bathrooms, common bathrooms on the hallways. So although we had to make these rooms far more efficient because we integrated bathrooms into each one of them en suite, it really makes for a far more marketable guest experience, but it meant that everything's very tight. So these bathrooms were really a design challenge to try and mesh them into the very tight nature of the space and also have them align with the historic windows. But it really turned out to be quite a success, I think, in these barn door doors to the bathroom were a great solution for a very tight fit within the existing space. This is just a before photograph of the library. And this is what it looked like in its fully completed and renovated state. This is really the heart of the building. This is historically where people would really gather and collaborate and convene when they were here for various activities. And I think the cathedral and we felt like that was going to be true moving forward. So this has a lot of its original detail that was just restored. The historic light fixtures were restored. The wood flooring was actually installed new. We couldn't salvage and repurpose the flooring, but a lot of the casework and millwork was restored. And you'll see above the fireplace here is the portrait of Bishop Freeman that was in one of those historic photographs previously. And this is the photo of one of actually the accessible suite. So the accessible suite is larger than the others. It was previously called the warden suite because the warden of the college would reside here. We were able to sort of retrofit this, save a lot of the original wood detailing in the fireplace, etc., and repurpose this into a larger suite that could be fully accessible. Oops. And I think that's my concluding slide, actually. How did I do on time? Oh, all right, right.
Great. If anyone has a question, you can put it into the Q&A. I know that Jim might have time for one question,
Yeah.
maybe.
All right. I can take a couple questions. That's okay.
Let's see. I guess while I'm waiting for a submission, I'll ask you my question. But what do you think was the most challenging part of designing the interior of this building or redesigning?
Well, I think I touched on it a couple times. One of the most challenging components was, as I mentioned, there are 15 different levels on the inside of the building. So trying to navigate a way in which there was clear circulation, but also accessible circulation was really challenging. And we didn't want to detract too much from a lot of these wonderful historic spaces, but at the same time, we had to mesh in those new elevators to be able to mitigate all the different levels and also make a very clear circulation path. I mean, even with all that we did, people get lost in this building because of the nature of the corridors and the different levels. So it was really trying to give some clarity to the circulation, to the egress, and to the university accessibility, I think was one of the highest challenges, while trying to not detract from a lot of the historic spaces.
Yeah, okay, so we have a few questions. So somebody is asking, I don't know if you know, Jim, but are the sleeping accommodations available for unaffiliated guests or specifically for religiously affiliated individuals?
Good question. So I think they are. We completed the building in June of this last year of 2023, and I think they're sorting out their programming. For the most part, they're moving forward. We're trying to have affiliation use. So people who use the building need to have some affiliation with the cathedral and its programming. So that's how they're going to be starting the use of the rooms. They are just getting organized about how to manage all this and have hired someone to start to manage that process. So it's all relatively new, but I think to answer the question, you're not going to be able to go on Airbnb and rent a room.
It's a bummer because they're gorgeous, but
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
um, okay, I'll ask you one more, and I don't know uh, your extent of knowledge about this, but do you know when St. Albans Church was built and what its relation is to the National Cathedral?
That's a really good question. I don't know exactly when St. Albans Church was built, but it pre-existed the cathedral. And so the cathedral is the cathedral of the Diocese of Washington. St. Albans is a parish church within the Diocese of Washington. So there's a very different purpose between a parish church and a cathedral. So the cathedral is the seat of the bishop, and in this case, there are two bishops associated with Washington National Cathedral. There's the Bishop of the Diocese of Washington, which is currently Bishop Marianne Edgar Buddy, but it also is the seat of the Bishop of the National Episcopal Church. But the St. Albans is a parish church, so it is one of 88 parish churches within the Diocese of Washington, and has its own congregation and functions separately from the cathedral, although it is on the cathedral grounds and is in many ways namesake for St. Albans School. So
Great. Thank you so much, Jim. And I will let you go. If anyone has a burning question, you can email me and I will connect you to Jim. But thank you so much, Jim. And I hope everybody has a great day.
great. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Bye.